My dear friend, today I want to remind you of something the world often tries to bury in silence. Broken does not mean finished. Torn edges do not mean worthless. Even the tattered wings, scarred by storms, heavy with dust, can still catch the wind and find their way back to the sky. We are taught from the beginning to equate beauty with wholeness, strength with perfection, and worth with applause. We see birds in flight and marvel at the smooth symmetry of their wings, the grace of their movements, the elegance of their freedom. But no one tells us that not every wing that flies is flawless. No one tells us that some of the strongest creatures in the sky have known brokenness before they ever knew flight. You see, the lie we carry deep within us is this: because I have been hurt, I cannot rise. Because I have been scarred, I cannot shine. Because I have fallen, I must remain on the ground. That lie has trapped countless souls in cages they were never meant to inhabit. And yet, the truth, the kind of truth that shakes you awake, is this: your breaking point is not the end of your becoming. It is often the very beginning. Think of a seed. On the surface, it looks whole, small, and unremarkable. But for it to grow, it must split open, surrendering its old form so something new can take root. That breaking is not death. It is the beginning of life. The same is true of you. The cracks you carry are not evidence of failure. They are evidence that something within you is pushing to be born, to stretch, to rise. But I know, my friend, how heavy the breaking feels when you are in it. When betrayal cuts deep, when loss steals your breath, when disappointment lingers like a shadow that refuses to leave your side. It feels as if your wings have been torn beyond repair, and the whispers of doubt echo louder. You will never fly again. Yet pause here and consider, what if those torn feathers are not the end of your story, but the proof of your courage? What if every rip is a testimony that you dared to fly in the first place? What if your scars are not shameful, but sacred, reminders that you faced the storm and, though shaken, you endured? The world is filled with polished masks. People walk around with smiles that hide fractures, with voices that disguise tremors, with eyes that refuse to reveal their ache. But true power is not born in perfection. It is born in authenticity. It is born in the ability to stand in the middle of your brokenness and still whisper, "I will rise." There is no courage in pretending you've never fallen. The courage is in admitting the fall, feeling its weight, and still choosing to get up. The courage is in saying, "Yes, my wings are torn, but they are mine. And even in their tattered state, they will carry me higher than those who never dared to leap." So many of us wait for the day we feel whole again before we begin to live. We say to ourselves, when the pain passes, then I'll try. When I feel strong again, then I'll rise. When I am unscarred, then I'll fly. But listen closely. The sky is not waiting for your perfection. The sky is waiting for your presence. You don't need flawless wings to soar. You only need the willingness to rise as you are. Let me tell you this: life has never chosen the polished to be its greatest teachers. Life has always chosen the scarred. Because it is the scarred who understand endurance. It is the scarred who know compassion. It is the scarred who carry wisdom etched not in books, but in bone, in heart, in memory. The smooth wings glide, yes, but it is the torn wings that teach the rest of us how to believe again. The breaking humbles you. It strips away illusion. It makes you stop running long enough to face yourself as you are, raw, unfinished, vulnerable. And in that moment of surrender, something holy happens. You realize that strength is not the absence of pain. Strength is the decision to rise within the pain. So as we begin this journey together, hold this truth in your chest. No matter how broken you feel, no matter how heavy the storm has been, No matter how many times your wings have been torn, you are still capable of flight. Not because the world says so, not because anyone else will carry you, but because there is a wind inside you that refuses to die. And when that wind meets your tattered wings, something extraordinary happens. You rise. Not perfectly, not smoothly, not without trembling, but you rise. And every rise, however unsteady, is a declaration that the breaking was not your ending. It was your becoming. So today I ask you to look at your scars differently, to see them not as barriers but as openings, to see your broken wings not as proof of weakness but as the very reason you are destined to soar higher. For the truth is simple. Even the tattered wings can soar. And when they do, carry stories the untouched wings will never know. And this is where the quiet shift begins. Understanding that your scars are not barriers but bridges. They do not close doors, they open paths. They lead you to places only the wounded can walk with clarity. Places where your depth becomes your greatest compass. It is in this depth that you begin to see how every wound carved wisdom into your being. That heartbreak you thought would hollow you out, it taught you what love is not, so you could someday recognize what love truly is. That disappointment that bent your spirit, it was bending you toward humility, toward patience, toward faith you didn't know you possessed. That betrayal that split you open, it stripped away illusions, leaving behind a raw honesty that now guides your steps. Tattered wings do not soar despite the storms. They soar because of them. Each tear is a map. Each scar is a lesson. Each fall has shaped the angles of your rise. When you stop wishing the pain away and begin listening to what it has whispered into you, you realize you are not weaker for what you've endured. You are more alive, more awake, more human. The danger is not in the pain itself, but in the temptation to remain grounded by it. Too many sit on the edge of the nest, staring at the horizon, convinced their time to fly has passed. They convince themselves that because their feathers aren't as smooth as others, because their journey has been slower, they are somehow disqualified from the sky. But remember, smooth wings may glide, yet they do not carry the gravity of survival. It is the battered feathers that prove resilience, and resilience is the truest form of strength. Think of how mountains are shaped, not by calm breezes, but by storms and eruptions. Think of how rivers carve valleys, not through stillness, but through relentless movement, persistence, force. Think of how diamonds are born, not in comfort, but in pressure. You too are being carved, pressed, shaped into something luminous by the very forces you once thought would destroy you. Yes, there will be days when rising feels impossible, days when every attempt feels like falling back into the same shadows. But falling is not failure. It is practice. Each time you fall and still attempt to rise, you strengthen a muscle within you that can never be built through ease. Ease does not make you strong. Struggle does. And it is in this struggle that your wings learn to bear more weight, to carry you farther than you thought possible. Do not underestimate the quiet victories. The mornings you forced yourself to rise from bed despite the heaviness in your chest. The evenings you chose to breathe through the ache rather than numb it away. The conversations you had with yourself in silence, reminding yourself you are worthy even when no one else echoed it. These small moments are the stitching of your wings, the unseen mending that prepares you for flight again. And when you do rise, however slowly, you will notice something the unbroken never see. The beauty of flight is not in its smoothness, but in its defiance. To fly with tattered wings is to declare to the universe, I am still here. I am still becoming. I am not done yet. That declaration carries more power than any flawless glide, because it is real. It is born not from perfection, but from persistence. The truth is, brokenness will visit every life, but brokenness is not your identity. It is your passage. The key is refusing to mistake the passage for the destination. You were not meant to remain in the valley of despair. You were meant to walk through it, gather its lessons, and carry them into the light. So when you feel the weight of doubt pressing against you, remember the sky is not asking you to be flawless. It is asking you to be willing to open your wings no matter how tattered, and trust that the wind knows how to lift what seems unliftable. Willing to believe that your story does not end in the breaking, but begins again in the rising. And isn't that the essence of hope? Not the denial of pain, but the courage to keep moving through it. Hope is what whispers to you when your wings tremble. Try again. The sky is waiting. Every time you rise, you leave behind an echo. A trail for others who are watching, wondering if they can rise too. They see your scars, they see your trembling, and they realize that flight is not reserved for the untouched. Flight belongs to the ones who dare, even when their feathers are frayed. Flight belongs to the ones who, despite the storms, open their wings and lean into the wind. So hold this truth in your spirit. You have not been disqualified by the breaking. You have been prepared by it. Your scars are not the reason you cannot fly. They are the very reason you will. And when you lift from the ground, with all your imperfections and tremors, you prove a greater truth than any perfect wing ever could, that even the broken are born to rise. And with this, we step deeper into the journey, into the recognition that pain is not a prison but a teacher, one that reshapes, refines, and readies you for the heights waiting ahead. And as you step forward, you begin to see that the strength you once searched for outside has been quietly forming within you. Like hidden roots spreading beneath the soil, unseen but unshakable, your resilience has been preparing you for seasons you didn't even know were coming. The truth is, growth is not always loud. It does not always announce itself with applause or clarity. Sometimes it arrives silently, tucked inside your persistence. The moments when you felt invisible, when the world overlooked you, those were the very moments your spirit was weaving new fibers of endurance. Strength rarely blooms in the spotlight. It is cultivated in the shadows where no one claps, where only your own heart can hear the rhythm of survival. And so the question becomes, will you trust the unseen? Will you trust that even when progress feels invisible, it is no less real? For the wings you carry, frayed though they may be, are not ornaments for display. They are tools built for movement. They are reminders that life was never meant to keep you still. Consider how rivers find their way. They do not demand straight paths. They carve them. With patience, with persistence, they shape the land into new forms. You too are carving a way forward, not because the world handed you a clear map, but because you are willing to move, even when the terrain is uncertain. This willingness, more than talent, more than perfection, is what transforms brokenness into rebirth. Yes, you have been altered. You cannot deny it. But altered does not mean ended. To be altered is to be rewritten, to be reformed into something unexpected. Think of clay under the hands of a sculptor. It must be pressed, reshaped, sometimes broken down to be rebuilt into beauty. Life in its own quiet artistry has been shaping you in just the same way. And here lies a paradox. The very experiences that threaten to shatter you are the ones that expanded your capacity for depth. When you sat in silence with your own ache, you discovered empathy. When you endured long nights with no answers, you discovered patience. When you walked through rejection, you discovered that your worth was never dependent on acceptance. Each loss peeled away illusions, leaving behind truths no one can take from you. This is why you must stop comparing your wings to another's. You do not know the weight of their skies, nor do they know the storms you've endured. What you carry is yours, and what you've learned is sacred. If your wings look different now, so be it. They are the marks of your survival, and survival is not something to hide, it is something to honor. Do not be afraid of moving at your own rhythm. Some journeys rise quickly like fire, others unfold slowly like dawn. But both are powerful. Both transform everything they touch. Your rise does not have to mirror anyone else's. The very fact that you still rise is testament enough. So instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" begin to ask, "What is this shaping in me?" That shift changes everything. It pulls you out of the cycle of despair and into the rhythm of discovery. Suddenly, every ache has meaning. Every stumble carries wisdom. Every scar is a signature of your becoming. And with this realization, you also learn the sacred art of letting go. Because rising is not just about lifting yourself. It is about releasing the weights that keep you earthbound. The bitterness you cling to. The anger that still smolders. The shame that whispers at night. These are not your identity. They are anchors. And the sky has no patience for anchors. It may feel terrifying to release what has been part of you for so long, even if it hurt you. But consider this. The bird that refuses to leave its cage may feel safe, but it will never know the horizon. Freedom requires surrender. Flight requires release. You cannot soar while gripping the bars of your own prison. This letting go is not weakness. It is a higher form of strength. The strength to trust what comes after. The strength to believe that even empty hands are capable of holding abundance again. The strength to say, "I no longer need to carry this story in order to prove who I am." And as you loosen your grip on what was, something remarkable begins to happen. The winds shift. Doors open. New possibilities emerge. Because the universe always makes room for those willing to rise lighter. You see, resilience is not just about enduring. It is about transforming. It is about turning what tried to bury you into the very soil from which you grow. It is about declaring that your story will not end in ashes. It will end in ascent. So carry this with you now. Your wings, tattered though they may be, are still wings. They were built for motion, for risk, for faith. And each time you choose to open them, you prove to yourself and to the world that brokenness was never your final chapter. From here, we step into an even deeper truth. That your rising is not for you alone. It is a light for others still sitting in shadow, proof that even the most wounded can find their way to the sky. That light you carry, faint though it may feel at times, becomes a signal to others who are lost in their own silence. For in a world where many disguise their pain behind polished masks, the honesty of your survival becomes rare and radiant. People do not always need someone who appears unbreakable. They need someone who has broken and still chosen to rise. That is the gift you offer. Not perfection, but authenticity. Not answers, but evidence that answers can be found. Think of how a single candle in a dark room does not erase the darkness, yet it changes everything within it. The presence of light is enough to remind the room that night cannot fully claim it. In the same way, your rise, however quiet, however unseen, reshapes the atmosphere around you. You do not need to announce your transformation. It will announce itself through your presence. Your resilience will echo in the way you speak, in the patience of your listening, in the steadiness of your steps. Others, still bound by their doubts, will see something in you they crave but cannot yet name. Some will be drawn to it, finding courage in your endurance. Others may resist it, threatened by the reflection it forces upon their own unhealed places. But do not let that sway you. The purpose of your rising is not to convince the unwilling. It is to call the ready, to show that even in fractured places, life continues to grow. And isn't it remarkable? How the very chapters you once wished you could erase become the pages that inspire someone else to keep going. You wanted those nights forgotten, those tears buried, those moments of despair erased. Yet those are the very lines someone else is waiting to read, the proof that they too are not beyond redemption. Your pain, once transformed, becomes a bridge, a way across for someone who thought they would drown. But here lies another truth you must face. Rising does not mean returning to what was. It means stepping into what can be. Too many exhaust themselves trying to rebuild an old version of life, forcing broken pieces into shapes they no longer fit. But you are not called to replicate what shattered. You are called to create what is new. What fell away was not punishment. It was clearing for something larger, freer, truer to the depth you've now discovered. So do not mourn the structures that collapsed under the weight of your transformation. They were not meant to contain you anymore. They cracked because you outgrew them. The friendships that dissolved, the opportunities that slipped away, the places you could no longer stay. They all made space for horizons that would have remained hidden had you stayed bound to what no longer served you. Rising, then, is not only about healing, it is about expansion. It is the widening of your world, the opening of doors you could not even see when you were bent beneath sorrow. Expansion means you stop shrinking yourself to fit old rooms and allow yourself to occupy the fullness of new spaces. Spaces where you are seen, valued, honored. Spaces where your voice does not echo unheard, but resonates. And yet, expansion requires courage, because to step into new ground, you must leave behind familiar terrain, even when that familiarity has harmed you. It means trusting that uncertainty can hold you just as surely as certainty once did. It means trading comfort for possibility, and that is not an easy trade. But it is the only one that allows you to move from merely existing to truly living. Ask yourself this: what tables, what rooms, what patterns are you still sitting in simply because they are familiar? What old identities do you cling to because they feel safe, though they suffocate your becoming? To rise, you must release them. You cannot hold on to both the cage and the sky. There is a boldness in choosing yourself after years of dimming for others. It is not arrogance. It is alignment. It is saying, I will no longer negotiate my worth. And as you embody this truth, the world around you will shift. Not always immediately, not always comfortably, but inevitably. Because when one person rises, they create space for others to do the same. Your freedom becomes contagious. Your courage becomes a mirror that shows others their own potential. And yes, there will be those who misunderstand, who whisper that you've changed, that you are no longer who you used to be. Let them whisper. They do not know that change was the goal all along. They cannot see that your rising is not a betrayal of who you were, but a fulfillment of who you were always meant to be. Carry this knowledge with you. Your transformation will unsettle some, inspire others, and liberate you. And in the end, that liberation is what matters most, because your life is not meant to be a performance for approval. It is meant to be a testament of truth. So rise, not in defiance, but in devotion. Devotion to your own soul. Devotion to the call that whispers you were not made to remain broken, not made to remain small. And in that rising, you will find not only your wings again, but the skies they were crafted for. And when you find those skies, something profound happens. You begin to notice how the air feels different when you are no longer gasping for breath in places that suffocated you. The sky is wide, and it does not demand that you fold yourself smaller to remain within its reach. It welcomes your full span. It allows you to stretch in ways you never thought possible. And in that stretch, you rediscover not just freedom, but capacity. The realization that you were built to hold more life, more love, more depth than you had ever allowed yourself to believe. But here is where the test deepens. Not everyone who once sat with you at those narrow tables can follow you into this sky. Some will try, but their vision remains fixed on the ground. They will not understand the altitude of your growth, and they will call it distance or pride. It is neither. It is simply that wings are useless in places that refuse to rise. So you must learn discernment. Not everyone is meant to walk beside you in this chapter. Some were lessons. Some were catalysts. Some were mirrors you needed only for a time. To cling to them now would be to tether yourself to weights that pull you back down. And why return to the ground you once struggled so hard to leave? Discernment asks you to be honest about who nurtures your flight and who quietly clips your feathers. It asks you to listen to the tone beneath the words, to notice whether their joy in your joy is genuine or rehearsed. Because you deserve to be surrounded by those who celebrate your rise, not those who endure it. And yet, letting go of people, even gently, is one of the hardest forms of courage, because history whispers, because nostalgia tugs, because loyalty sometimes blinds us to truth. But holding on to what diminishes you does not honor love. It distorts it. True love is not proven by staying where you are not respected. True love is proven when you allow yourself to grow, even if that growth means leaving some behind. As you continue to rise, you may discover something even more challenging. The voices of doubt are not always outside you. Often, they echo within. The ground you left behind left its imprint, its whispers of unworthiness, its residue of fear. And sometimes, even in open skies, those echoes resurface, asking, "Do you truly belong here?" What if you fall again? What if you are not strong enough to remain? This is where the deeper work begins. Not just to rise, but to remain aloft. Remaining requires not only courage, but consistency. It asks you to build a new dialogue within yourself, to replace those echoes of unworthiness with affirmations of belonging. It means whispering back to the doubt, "Yes, I belong. Yes, I may fall, but I will rise again. And yes, this space was always meant for me." Remaining aloft is not about perfection. It is about practice. Like a musician who must tune their instrument each day, you must tune your soul, adjust the strings of your thoughts, realign the rhythm of your actions, and remind yourself daily that worth is not earned by flight. It is revealed by it. And here's what you'll find. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. At first, every flap of your wings feels heavy, deliberate, effortful. But over time, what was once strain becomes grace. The sky no longer feels foreign. It feels like home. And home is not where you came from, but where you are most fully yourself. When you live from that place of authenticity, something extraordinary happens. You stop measuring your life against the pace of others. You no longer compare altitudes or trajectories. You no longer need to prove the height of your rise because the very fact that you rose at all becomes enough. You stop chasing validation like crumbs and begin feasting on the fullness of self-trust. From there, your life becomes less about survival and more about contribution. Because once you know you can rise, you begin to ask not only how far you can go, but how your flight can serve. You begin to recognize that the air you breathe is the same air that carries others, and your rise is not meant to consume it selfishly, but to stir currents that lift more than just yourself. Your existence becomes a current of hope for the ones still grounded, a living testament that broken does not mean finished, that falling does not mean final, that scars are not shackles but signatures of resilience. And when others see you, not untouchable but human, not flawless but faithful, they too begin to believe that their rise is possible. And isn't that the ultimate gift? That your survival is not just for you, but for every soul that doubts its own strength. That your rise becomes a call, a song, a signal that whispers across the winds. It is possible. You can stand again. You can open again. You can soar again. So never underestimate the quiet revolution of your courage. For while you thought you were simply saving yourself, you were also rewriting what survival means for everyone who watches you. You were showing that the skies are not reserved for the unbroken. They are open wide for all who dare to lift themselves. This is where the journey of rising shifts from being personal to becoming collective. Your wings are your own, yes, but the sky, they belong to us all. And every time you take flight, you make the world a little wider, a little freer, a little brighter for the rest of us. And as the world grows brighter because of your rise, a new challenge quietly reveals itself. The responsibility of carrying light without letting it consume you. For when you become a symbol, others will place their expectations upon you. They will want you to rise perfectly, to never falter, to always shine without shadow. But light is not constant blaze. Light flickers. It bends. It rests. And so must you. To live authentically in this new space, you must remember that your worth is not defined by how flawlessly you appear, but by how truthfully you exist. If you stumble, it does not undo your ascent. If you tremble, it does not erase your strength. Authenticity is not about performing flight, it is about embodying it, even when the winds are harsh, even when the skies turn gray. You will notice, too, that the higher you go, the thinner the air becomes. Success, growth, healing, all these things can feel isolating. You may find fewer voices who truly understand your journey. And here, in this quiet altitude, loneliness can creep in. It whispers, perhaps you should descend. Perhaps you don't belong here. But listen closely. Loneliness is not proof that you are misplaced. It is proof that you are expanding beyond what is familiar. It means you are stepping into spaces where few have dared to go. And yet, in those lonely moments, you must anchor yourself to the truth that belonging is not about numbers. It is about resonance. One voice that sees you fully, one presence that honors your soul, outweighs the crowd that only applauds the surface. Seek resonance, not recognition. For recognition fades with time, but resonance nourishes the roots of your being. Another test at this height is the temptation to look back down, to measure how far you have climbed against those still finding their wings. Comparison at ground level is distracting, but comparison at higher altitudes can be even more deceptive. You may begin to think, am I soaring enough? Should I be higher, faster, greater? But growth is not measured in distance. It is measured in depth. Depth of courage, depth of kindness, depth of authenticity. The world does not need you to fly the farthest. It needs you to fly true. Flying true means aligning your journey with your soul's rhythm, not with society's applause. It means remembering that every pause has value, that every rest is sacred, that every slowing down is not failure but wisdom. For even in stillness, the sky is still yours, and from that stillness, clarity emerges. You begin to see that the purpose of rising was never just to escape the ground. It was to discover the vision available only from above. From here, patterns that once confused you begin to make sense. You see why certain storms shaped you, why certain endings were necessary, why certain paths closed so others could open. The view from this place does not erase the pain, but it reframes it. Pain becomes context, not cage. This is where gratitude takes root. Gratitude not just for the ease, but for the trials that gave your strength texture. Gratitude for the tears that watered your resilience. Gratitude for the silence that taught you to listen. Gratitude for every fall that sharpened your rise. Gratitude does not deny the hurt, it simply acknowledges that the hurt became part of the harvest. And as gratitude blooms, it transforms the way you move. You no longer rise only for yourself. You rise with awareness, with compassion, with humility. Your presence becomes less about declaring, "Look at me," and more about whispering, "Look at what is possible." That shift is the hallmark of true greatness, not loudness, but impact. Greatness is not found in how many eyes see you, but in how many hearts feel you. It is not in the volume of your applause, but in the quietness of your influence. A single life touched deeply is more valuable than thousands touched lightly. Remember this when the world tempts you to measure yourself by scale instead of substance. And here is a deeper truth. Flight is not just about rising. It is about returning. Returning with what you've gathered. Returning with wisdom, with empathy, with perspective. You rise not to escape the world, but to re-enter it differently. Stronger, softer, clearer. You rise so that when you step back onto the ground, your footsteps carry new meaning. The air you have breathed above becomes the breath you share below. So when you rise, do not forget to return. Return to the one still searching. Return to the one still stumbling. Return to the spaces that shaped you but no longer define you. You do not return to stay, you return to serve. To serve as a reminder that rising is possible. To serve as living proof that brokenness can be remade into strength. To serve as a lantern for those still in shadow. And this, perhaps, is the most sacred part of the journey. Not that you flew, not that you reached heights, but that you became a bridge. A bridge between despair and hope, between silence and voice, between fall and rise. A bridge built not from perfection, but from perseverance. That bridge is what endures long after the applause fades, long after the winds shift, long after the sky itself grows dark. For the true legacy of your flight will not be measured in how high you went, but in how deeply you inspired others to believe they could rise too. And as you serve as that bridge, as you carry light into places where shadows once lived, you begin to realize something profound. The act of rising was never only for yourself. It was always preparing you to become a vessel, a carrier of possibility, a reminder of resilience. Because when people see you rise, they don't only see your triumph, they see their own reflection of what could be. You become not just a story, but a mirror. But carrying this gift is delicate. A mirror can inspire, but it can also cut if held without care, which means you must balance how you give of yourself. For if you pour endlessly into others and forget your own well, the light you hold dims. Not from weakness, but from exhaustion. To rise with impact means also to rise with wisdom, learning when to extend your hand and when to rest it by your side. This balance is not selfishness, it is stewardship. Just as a flame must be protected from strong winds, your spirit must be shielded from demands that threaten to extinguish it. You cannot be all things to all people. You are not meant to carry the entire world. You are meant to carry only what your soul can sustain. And in that carrying, you will be enough. And as you learn this balance, another truth begins to take shape. The flight of your life is not measured in how far you rise at once, but in how faithfully you continue to rise again and again. The rhythm of ascent is not a single upward sweep. It is cyclical, layered, textured. At times you will soar with speed. At other times you will hover, adjusting, waiting for new winds to come. Each movement has its place. Each phase has its purpose. What matters most is that you do not mistake a pause for a defeat. Rest is not regression. It is part of the pattern of endurance. Just as the seasons teach us that growth requires both blossoming and dormancy, your own spirit will remind you that moments of stillness are not wasted. They are preparation for the next rise. And yet, in those pauses, doubt often sneaks in. The mind whispers, maybe you've risen as high as you can. Maybe this is the limit. But limits are rarely the truth. They are only echoes of fear. Fear wants you to believe that you have reached the edge, but courage knows that edges are beginnings in disguise. The moment you feel you cannot go further is often the moment your greatest expansion is waiting just beyond. This is where endurance becomes sacred. Endurance is not the glamorous part of flight. It is not the applause, not the visible soaring. It is the quiet decision to keep leaning into the wind, even when the air feels heavy. It is the unseen strength to remain open when everything in you wants to close. Endurance whispers, stay with it. Another current is coming. Another opening is near. And with endurance comes depth. Depth is born in those moments when you wanted to quit but didn't. Depth is carved by every tear you allowed to fall without letting it drown you. Depth is earned when you stand again, not because it was easy, but because you decided your spirit was worth the effort. Depth is what makes your presence unforgettable, not because you lived without breaking, but because you kept rising after every fracture. From this depth, humility flowers. For the higher you rise, the more clearly you see that your journey was never just about your own wings. Every lesson you've gathered, every scar you carry, every ounce of wisdom you now hold, it all equips you to guide, to nurture, to lift others. Not from a place of superiority, but from shared humanity. Humility understands that rising alone is achievement, but helping another to rise is legacy. And so, your journey becomes not just about how high you can fly, but how many others you can show that flying is possible. This does not mean you carry them, for that would break you both. It means you illuminate the sky so they may find their own current. You become a lighthouse, not a lifeboat. You show the way, but they must sail their own seas. This awareness transforms even your smallest choices, the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you stand in your truth. All of it becomes part of the flight others witness. You may never know who is watching, who is being shaped by your resilience, who is finding courage in your endurance. But know this, someone, somewhere, is. Your rise is never wasted, and in this realization, you come to peace with imperfection. For you understand at last that perfection was never the goal of your flight. It was authenticity, and authenticity is messy, vulnerable, beautifully flawed. It admits mistakes, it acknowledges struggle, It embraces the unfinished. But it is in this rawness that others connect, because it tells them they don't need to be flawless to rise. They only need to be faithful to the act of rising. The legacy of your flight will not be written in spotless skies, but in the truth you carried through storms. Not in polished perfection, but in your refusal to let failure have the final word. Not in how smoothly you flew, but in how deeply you inspired others to believe they could lift too. So let your flight be imperfect. Let it be human. Let it be true. Because in truth, you will leave behind not just the memory of soaring, but the memory of resilience. And that memory will live long after your wings grow weary, long after your body rests. For what endures is not the flight itself, but the fire it ignites in others. And it is that fire, glowing quietly within those who watch, that becomes the true measure of a life well lived. For when people remember you, they will not recall the perfection of your steps or the flawlessness of your path. They will remember how your presence made them feel capable of more. They will remember the courage that rose in their chest because they witnessed you walk into your storms and still emerge with light in your eyes. That is impact. That is legacy. But legacy is not something written only at the end of a life. It is crafted daily, in the smallest of moments. Each time you choose integrity over comfort, each time you choose love instead of bitterness, each time you rise instead of surrender, you are chiseling meaning into the walls of time. Reflection teaches us that what endures is not the grand gesture, but the steady consistency of how you live in the ordinary days. And here lies the deeper truth. Rising was never meant to be a solo performance. It is a dialogue between your spirit and the world. Every time you defy the weight of despair, you send out a ripple that touches shores you may never see. You may think your fight for healing, for dignity, for freedom is hidden, but unseen eyes are watching. Someone is learning how to hold their own ground because they saw you refuse to abandon yours. It's humbling, isn't it? To know that your struggles, the very things you wished had never happened, become the guideposts for another's survival. What once felt like unbearable shame transforms into sacred offering, pain repurposed into wisdom, fear reborn as faith. This is the alchemy of reflection, the transformation of suffering into service, of wounds into wisdom, of shadows into signposts. But to live this way requires vulnerability. It requires you to stop hiding the parts of you that once faltered, the seasons where you nearly broke. Too often, we believe strength means showing only the polished, the victorious, the triumphant. Yet what people need most is the unmasked story. They need to see the trembling, the waiting, the uncertainty that lived inside your journey. Because when they see that you, too, questioned, doubted, and hesitated, it gives them permission to believe their doubts do not disqualify them. In that honesty, your reflection becomes medicine, not the kind that numbs, but the kind that heals through recognition. Someone who thought they were alone discovers through your transparency that they are not. Someone who thought their cracks made them unworthy realizes their cracks are where strength is born. Someone who thought rising was reserved for the unscarred finally sees that scars are not the end, but the proof of beginning again. This is the deeper impact of choosing to rise. You extend the definition of possibility. You rewrite what endurance looks like. You show that resilience is not reserved for the gifted, but is carved into the soul of anyone willing to keep moving forward despite trembling knees and weary hearts. And as you reflect, you realize something even more profound. Rising changes not only how others see you, but how you see yourself. You begin to carry yourself differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet assurance. You know what you've walked through. You know what you've endured. You know the nights you thought would never end, and the mornings that proved they could. That knowledge becomes your armor, not against the world, but against the lies your own fear tries to whisper. You stop asking, "Am I enough?" Because reflection teaches you, you were enough even in the falling. You were enough even in the breaking. You were enough in the silence before the rise. Rising didn't make you worthy. It revealed the worth that was always there, waiting beneath the rubble of doubt. And now, when you look at the world, your vision is different. You no longer see only competition, noise, or chaos. You see human beings, each carrying hidden battles, each on their own uneven path of falling and rising. Reflection softens your gaze. It teaches you empathy not through theory, but through lived experience. You know what it is to ache, and so you understand others' pain without needing them to explain. You know what it is to rise trembling, and so you cheer quietly for those who are just now finding their feet. This empathy becomes your compass. It directs your steps toward compassion, toward kindness, toward truth. You stop wasting your time with trivialities because reflection reminds you that life is not infinite. You stop shrinking to fit into small places because reflection reminds you of the cost of dishonoring yourself. You stop running from silence because you've learned it is in silence that strength is renewed. And in this shift, life becomes less about achievement and more about alignment. Alignment with your values, with your integrity, with your calling. Reflection shows you that rising is not about being applauded by the world. It is about being at peace with yourself when the applause fades. For applause is temporary, but peace is enduring. So you begin to choose differently. You begin to ask not, "Will this impress them?" but, "Will this honor me?" Not, "Will they accept me?" but, "Will I still respect myself?" Each choice becomes less about performance and more about truth. And this truth strengthens you because it means that no matter the outcome, whether others celebrate you or criticize you, you remain anchored. You remain whole. That wholeness radiates outward. It becomes a calmness that steadies others, a groundedness that invites safety, a presence that reminds people that life is not about perfection, but about perseverance. This is the deeper impact your rising creates, not just a spark in others, but a steady flame that teaches them how to burn through their own nights of doubt. And perhaps the most humbling realization of all is this: reflection teaches you that the journey never ends. Rising is not a single moment to be captured and frozen. It is a rhythm, a cycle, a way of being. You will rise again and again in different seasons for different reasons, each time reshaping, each time refining, each time reminding yourself of the strength that cannot be taken. And if rising is a rhythm, then the closure is not silence, but a softer note that carries forward. For even when the storms quiet and the applause fades, something deeper remains, a presence that cannot be erased. You realize that all along the measure of your life was never in the flawless flights, but in the willingness to keep lifting your wings, no matter how frayed they became. Because wings, even when tattered, are still wings. They may not shimmer as they once did. They may bear the marks of wind and weather, but they still carry the same call, the call to move, to reach, to attempt. That is the hidden gift of imperfection. It does not strip away your capacity. It reveals your resilience. You see now that life never asked you for spotless strength. It asked only for courage to continue. It asked you to honor your own becoming, to step into the air again, not because you are unbroken, but because you have learned that broken does not mean finished. There is a sacred defiance in this truth, to stand with wings that bear scars and still say, "I will rise." To walk into tomorrow carrying evidence of yesterday's storms, yet refusing to be defined by them. That defiance is not arrogance. It is freedom. Freedom from the lie that worth depends on perfection. Freedom from the fear that falling means failure. Freedom from the voices that told you damaged souls cannot fly. For every mark upon you, every line carved by pain, every scar etched by struggle, they are not barriers, they are proofs. Proof that you stayed, proof that you endured, proof that even in the moments when you bent low, you never broke beyond repair. And now, those proofs become your wingspan, widening, expanding, reminding you that nothing, no loss, no wound, no betrayal, was ever strong enough to ground you forever. It is humbling to know that even in your most fragile form, you are still capable of flight. Not the polished soaring of a bird untouched, but the steady, determined flight of one who knows what it costs to rise. That flight carries a weight, and because of that weight, it carries meaning. People who see you fly with torn feathers understand something more important than perfection. They understand possibility. And possibility is contagious. When others watch you take off despite the fractures, they see their own reflection in you. They remember that their scars too are not an end. They recognize that courage is not born in pristine skies, but in storm-torn hearts that still refuse to surrender. So the final truth becomes this: the sky does not belong to the flawless, it belongs to the faithful. It belongs to those who show up again and again, no matter how many times they have been thrown down. It belongs to those who stretch their wings even when uncertain if the wind will hold. It belongs to those who choose to trust that the very air that once felt hostile can now carry them into new horizons. And perhaps this is the most beautiful lesson of all, that soaring is not about escaping what was. It is about carrying it differently, carrying it with tenderness instead of shame, carrying it with wisdom instead of fear, carrying it with gratitude instead of bitterness. For the past will always remain a part of your wings, but it will no longer be the weight that drags you. It will be the pattern that makes your flight unique. So let the world see your tattered edges. Let them see the uneven feathers, the marks of seasons survived. Do not hide them, for those marks speak louder than flawless wings ever could. They tell a story of one who dared, one who endured, one who kept choosing to rise. And in the telling, they give others permission to rise too. The closure, then, is not an ending. It is a reminder that even now, even here, even with everything you have carried, you are still capable of lifting, still capable of moving forward, still capable of flight. And when you lift at last, when you stretch against the sky with all that you are, unpolished, imperfect, yet unyielding, the heavens will not ask if your wings are new. They will only ask if you dared to spread them. So do not wait. Do not hide. Do not measure your worth by how smooth your feathers appear. Measure it by the courage it takes to rise again. Measure it by the faith it takes to trust the air. Measure it by the truth you now know deep within. Even the tattered wings can soar, and the sky has been waiting for yours.